We've negotiated a successful arrangement on the repayment of the $1.6 billion to the federal government as a result of the referendum decision to go back and exit out of the HST arrangement. I want to thank the Prime Minister and Minister Flaherty for the cooperative way in which we've managed to reach an agreement. An agreement I think is fair for both sides. It's fair for the federal government in that it ensures they are repaid back in full the $1.6 billion that they provided to the province of BC to allow us to transition into the HST. And it's fair for British Columbians because it allows us to repay that back over 5 years without interest, which will have significant savings for the taxpayers of British Columbia. In fact, about $118 million in avoided interest costs that we would otherwise have to pay if we were forced to borrow all of that money this year. So I think that the end result is a good one, and again I want to thank both the Prime Minister and Minister Jim Flaherty for the arrangement we ultimately were able to come to.
Minister, is this the best deal that you were able to get?
It is, because the federal government, as you know, is working hard to get back to balanced budget, and they've got serious and difficult challenges ahead of them. And we recognize that. And we also, of course, have our own challenges, and having to repay back $1.6 billion all at once meant that we would have to borrow those dollars and pay interest on those dollars. And so we were trying very hard for a deal that would allow us to repay that over time, and by allowing us to repay it over 5 years without interest, that's a real significant benefit to British Columbia, because it means that although we are required to book the entire $1.6 billion in this fiscal year, that's in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, we are allowed to cash flow that payment over 5 years, and that's where we save $118 million in avoided interest. So that's a very fair deal.
Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong.
For the budget, saving that much money, what will that mean to put back in?
Well, first of all, just at a very basic level, it means that we have $118 million that's more available to service the needs of British Columbians, whether that's in helping us get back to balanced budget or dealing with some fiscal pressures. It's a real win for British Columbians. Obviously, in a perfect world, I wish we didn't have to pay back anything, but the referendum decision was clear and the direction was clear to the government of BC, and we're obviously following through in that direction. But what we're trying to do is minimize the financial impact of the province, and today's agreement does that.
Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd need Ottawa to help you out in expediting the return to the GST arrangement.
It's a partnership.
So are you guys negotiating that to expedite the March date of 2013?
Yeah, so this gets rid of one of the first big hurdles that was in the way, that had a real significant financial impact that I was concerned about, because we, of course, are committed to getting back to a balanced budget in 13-14, and this goes a long way towards helping us achieve that goal. The other challenge is working on issues around transitional rules, that we still have a fair bit of work to do, but the federal government has been nothing but cooperative in that area, and we're forging ahead as quickly as we can to try and bring about the greatest degree of certainty we can to the public and industry in BC.
Do you expect that date to shift then? Could we see HST off the books this year?
No. I wish. I really wish that could be the case. I genuinely do, because it would put all of this behind us a lot quicker. But the reality is the complexity of going back to the PST involves rehiring up to 300 staff and setting up the whole new provincial sales tax system again. It means getting over 100,000 businesses up to speed on software, transitioning their computer programs to be able to allow them to get back to a two-tax system, and making sure that when we flick the switch on March the 31st, 2013, that all of the business community is ready to go, so that there's not going to be any problems for consumers or business. And it is extraordinarily complex, but we're moving as fast as we responsibly can.
What do you think the government has to offer I know that they're talking about giving us some credit for 2 years of HST. Is there something like that?
Well, there was a lot of horse trading, and it's why it was a difficult negotiation, and it was protracted. I mean, we've been negotiating this back and forth, and it's been a very difficult negotiation. But I can tell you, whether I was speaking to the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance, they were always operating from a position that was trying to be fair to British Columbia, but also fair to the federal government. And I think what we've landed at is something that I can truly say is a fair deal. It's a fair deal for the taxpayers of British Columbia, and it's a fair deal for the federal government and Canadian taxpayers. And so I'm really very satisfied with where we ended up.
5 years, paying 5 years, and then I know you talked about accounting principles, but why couldn't you put that over the books? I mean, it sounds like the deficit is going to be large.
Well, the projected deficit in 2013-14, as I reported out in the second quarterly results, is $458 million, but I can tell you it's worsened since then, and we acknowledge that in the second quarterly report. Excuse me. So we know 13-14 is going to be a challenge, but it would have been a much bigger challenge had we been required to pay all of this $1.6 billion back this year. And the reason it would be a bigger challenge is because I would have been required to go and borrow that money. And obviously that puts us into a further deficit this year, and then had to pay interest on all of those borrowed dollars for years to come. So the agreement we've reached means that I don't have to borrow all of that $1.6 billion this year, even though we book all of that for accounting purposes. It means I only have to borrow $320 million. And the same thing for each and every year of the 5-year agreement that we have with the federal government. And that means that we are not going to have to pay $118 million in interest costs, which is very, very good for us in terms of meeting our fiscal challenges, but also fair to British Columbians.
So Kevin, remind me, what's the deficit for 2013-2014?
Well, it's projected at $458 million. I think realistically we're probably close to $700 million in terms of where the situation is. It's obviously always a moving target. And as you know, this year, because of the requirement to book the entire repayment of the $1.6 billion for accounting principles, that put us into a situation where we're looking at a deficit of just over $3 billion. So, you know, it makes it difficult for us, which is why we are ensuring that we are going to get back to balanced budget in 13-14. We think that that is important to ensure that we maintain and protect the AAA credit rating that BC has. We're one of the few jurisdictions in the world that enjoys the top credit rating as a result of being good fiscal managers. We're going to make sure that continues.
BC was already facing fiscal challenges. I mean, how would you describe this sort of dealing with this body, this sort of challenges you're going to face, and how will it affect the budget next year?
Well, it really it takes a big roadblock out of the way for me as the finance minister, because having this hang over my head was a real challenge, because we're trying to get to a balanced budget, and I had the uncertainty of knowing what the fiscal impact of this $1.6 billion repayment is going to be. So coming to this agreement is really good for me in that it removes all of that uncertainty now. So I'm now in a very certain position. I know exactly what we're doing. It's paid back over 5 years without interest, and that makes my job a lot easier. I can now move on to all of the other challenges associated with balancing a $44 billion budget in a world economic climate that's very challenging.
When did you strike the deal?
We finalized the deal literally late last night. It has been a back and forth arrangement that we finalized late last night.
You're still going to have to find that 1.6 billion though, right? It was spent. It's not in escrow or anything. So where are you going to find it?
That's true. The final payment, of course, that we received, because it was 1.6 billion that was paid to us in tranches, and the final payment was received after we realized that we were going to have to pay it back. So with the exception of that final tranche payment, yes, we have to pay it back. And so what we wanted to try and do was minimize the impact of paying it back, and that's what we've been able to achieve as a result of paying it over 5 years.
But you got to find what, 1 billion at least. What was that final payment?
Well, it was, my recollection is it was around the $500 million.
So 1 billion you still have to find within the budget. So how are you going to find those dollars? Where are they going to come from?
Well, you know, as I say, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have been facing this challenge. But we live in a world where we deal with the way things are not as the way we wish they were. And so it makes it a challenge for us. But we have faced challenges before as a government, and one of the reasons why we enjoy the highest credit rating possible is because we've tackled those challenges head on. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the repayment of this $1.6 billion, and also getting back to balanced budget in 13-14. We're going to address those challenges head on.
Specifically, where have you found those dollars yet? Where are you going to find those dollars? Where are they going to come from? Specifically.
Yeah, well, and that's why I'm going through a budget process, and that's what you'll find out about in February when I release the budget.
But we're not going to see social services, anything on the chopping block at this point?
Well, I mean, you know, obviously when you go into a budget, everything is on the table. You have to look at everything to figure out how you're going to get back to balancing the budget. And that's part of the reason why we are trying to engage the public and engage them through things like the budget simulator, so that we can create a literacy, if you will, around budget making and try and demystify this whole process for the public. It is not a perfect instrument. I've been the first one to say it's far from perfect, but it's trying to see if we can't demystify budget making and let the public understand that everything we do as finance ministers trying to get to a balanced budget is all about trade-offs. And I'm hoping that by engaging the public we can help demystify some of that process.